She wasn't crying. That's what stopped him. Any other child barefoot, February, Chicago, ribs showing through a soaked red dress would have been screaming, begging, dissolving on the pavement outside the most expensive restaurant in the city. But this little girl just stood there, bare tucked under one arm, rain coming down, looking up at him like she already knew what the answer was going to be and had decided to ask anyway, because this was the last door on the street. "Mister, do you know anyone who wants me?" Voice like she was trying not to cost him anything by using it. Ryu Taeyang had walked out of that building tonight having just decided 3 men would not see morning. He had a war to prevent, money moving across 4 countries, and 12 people waiting on a single word from him. He looked at the child. Then he looked at the guard beside her, the one whose hand was still half raised to shoo her away. The guard lowered his hand. Slowly, the look on Ryu's face had explained everything that needed explaining. Ryu crouched until his eyes were level with hers. Behind him, 4 of the most dangerous men in Illinois stood motionless in the sleet, because not one of them had ever seen their boss kneel, for anything, for anyone. "What's your name?" She studied him the way children who've been hurt study adults, not the face, but the thing living behind it. "Nala." Then, quieter, "Mama said if I ever got lost, find the man with the dragon tattoo. She said he'd be the only one who'd want me." As he shifted his weight, his shirt cuff slid back, coiled around his wrist, ink black and precise the tail of a dragon. Nala's eyes went wide. She didn't pull away. She reached out one frozen finger and touched it. 5 years since a woman he didn't deserve had pressed her hand against his bleeding side, told him to run, and died in an alley 3 blocks from where he was currently kneeling in the rain. 60 months carrying a debt with no address, until a 6-year-old just delivered it herself. He stood, removed his coat, wrapped it around her in one motion, no hesitation, no ceremony, and looked at his head of security over the top of her head. "Tell Chef Cho, and find out what size shoes she wears." He extended his hand, palm up. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she placed her small, cold fingers into his, tucked her bear tighter under her other arm, and walked through the golden doors of obsidian, his coat dragging behind her on the floor like a train. Nobody spoke, because every man on that sidewalk understood, without being told, that the 60 seconds that just happened had changed everything. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Nala had never been in an elevator before. She'd spent the entire ride up pressing her palm flat against the mirrored wall, watching her own reflection like it belonged to someone else. A girl in a man's coat, barefoot, bare in her arms, riding a golden box into the sky. She hadn't said a word. Neither had Ryu. Now she stepped out and stopped. The penthouse sprawled before her like something from a world that didn't know hers existed. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the entire space. And beyond the glass, Chicago burned with light towers, bridges, the dark ribbon of the river cutting through it all like a scar. Rain streaked the windows in long silver lines. From up here, the storm looked almost beautiful. Almost. Nala looked down at her bare feet on the warm marble floor, then back up at the city. She took one step forward, then another, until she was standing directly at the glass, her breath fogging a small circle against it, the bear pressed to her chest. Ryu watched her from the elevator threshold. He had stood in this penthouse 10,000 times, had made decisions here that moved markets, ended careers, buried men who had made the mistake of underestimating him. He had never once looked at the view. He looked at it now, through her eyes, and it was different. His head of security, Jin Ho, appeared at his shoulder, low voice, professional tension. "Sir, the council won't accept this. The syndicate has rules about outside attachments. I know the rules. You wrote the rules. I know that too." Jin Ho said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "What do you want me to tell them?" Ryu watched Nala press one finger against the glass, tracing the outline of a distant bridge. "Tell them the rules changed. Tonight." Jinho exhaled through his nose, not quite a sigh, not quite agreement, and walked away to make calls that would keep 12 powerful men from doing something they'd regret. Chef Cho arrived before the Juk did. She was 63 years old, 4 feet 11, and the only person in the building who spoke to Ryu Taeyang without measuring every word first. She had fed him since he was 19 and had nothing. She had outlasted 3 wars, 2 betrayals, and 1 assassination attempt that had taken out half his kitchen staff. She was, by every practical measure, the most fearless person in the syndicate. She took one look at Nala, standing at the window, and made a sound in the back of her throat, something between fury and heartbreak, that said everything about the bruise on the child's cheek and the dress that had no business being worn in February. She crossed the room, crouched down, and spoke in a voice that could have softened concrete. "Aigu, look at you. Come with Cho." Nala turned, looked at her carefully. Then and Ryu caught this. Filed it somewhere important. She looked back at him first. A quick glance. Checking. He gave the smallest nod. She went with Chef Cho. 40 minutes later, the bear was propped against a pillow on the guest bed. Nala sat at the kitchen island in an oversized sweatshirt that came down to her knees, her hair wrapped in a warm towel, her feet finally covered in socks 3 sizes too large. Chef Cho set a bowl of juk in front of her, white rice porridge, soft and steaming, with a soft-boiled egg nested in the center and a few drops of sesame oil pooling at the surface. Simple, gentle, the kind of food built for people who needed to be eased back into the world. Nala stared at it. Chef Cho sat across from her, folded her hands, and waited. Ryu stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching. Nala picked up the spoon, dipped it, brought it to her lips. Her eyes closed briefly, involuntarily, the way they close when something catches you off guard and you need a second to absorb it. Then, carefully, methodically, she began eating. She'd made it halfway through the bowl when Ryu saw her hand move under the counter. Slow, deliberate, wrapping her fist around a piece of bread, not eating it, pocketing it, storing it for the version of tomorrow her body still believed was coming, the one where the food ran out and hunger was simply what the hours felt like. Ryu pulled out the stool across from her and sat down. She froze. He reached into the breadbasket, took a piece, ate it slowly, without theater, without making it mean anything. Then he pushed the basket to her side of the counter. Take as much as you want. There's always more. You don't have to save anything here, Nala. Something moved through her expression, complicated, private, too large for her face to fully contain. She didn't take the bread out of her pocket, but she stopped reaching for more to hide. He stayed at the counter until she finished every last drop, not hovering, just present, a steady thing in the room that didn't move or threaten or disappear. In the pocket of her borrowed sweatshirt, the bread stayed until morning. She didn't eat it. She just needed to know it was there. 3 days passed before Nala spoke at the dinner table, not because she was mute. Ryu had heard her small sounds, mostly. A question murmured to Chef Cho about whether the porridge would be there tomorrow. A soft word to her bear in the dark hours before dawn when she thought the penthouse was sleeping. Once, briefly, a sound that might have been humming, stopping the moment footsteps passed the door. She had a voice. She just deployed it the way someone deploys something precious sparingly, only when the cost had been calculated. What she did instead of speaking was watch. She watched everything. The way Jinho checked the elevator before Ryu stepped into it. The way Chef Cho tasted every dish twice before it left the kitchen. The way the 2 guards at the stairwell entrance changed positions every 4 hours without being told. She sat in corners, back against the wall, bare in her lap, cataloging this world with the systematic patience of a child who had learned that understanding your environment was the difference between safe and not safe. Ryu noticed. He said nothing about it. He simply made sure that everything she observed was worth observing. On the 4th evening, Chef Cho made doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean paste stew, thick and dark, with tofu and zucchini, and a depth of flavor that took all day to build. The smell moved through the penthouse 2 hours before the food was ready. Dense, warm, ancient in the way that only fermented things are ancient, carrying the comfort of 1,000 Korean kitchens across 100 years. Nala appeared in the kitchen doorway 40 minutes before dinner. She stood at the threshold with her bear and watched Chef Cho work, and Chef Cho, wise enough to know that an invitation would be the wrong move, simply kept stirring and began narrating in a low, unhurried voice, the way a person talks to a small animal they want to stop being afraid of them. Doenjang, you let it age. The longer it sits, the stronger it becomes. A pause. Good things usually work that way. Nala said nothing, but she took 1 step into the kitchen. Chef Cho kept her eyes on the pot. By the time dinner was ready, Nala was sitting on the counter 3 feet away, watching the ladle move. The table was set for 2. Previously, Ryu had eaten alone, always alone, by preference and by the particular loneliness of men who have made themselves impossible to sit with. But tonight, Chef Cho had set 2 places without being asked, and disappeared with the efficiency of someone who had already decided how the evening would go. Nala stood at the edge of the dining room. Ryu was already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He had a document open beside his plate habit, the inability to occupy a room without working, but he closed it when she appeared. He gestured to the chair across from him. She came, slowly, pulled herself up, settled her bear against the table's edge, and looked at the bowl in front of her. They ate in silence. But it was a different silence than before, not the silence of avoidance, not the careful quiet of 2 people managing distance. It was the silence of 2 people who had independently decided that the room was safe enough to simply exist in. Halfway through the meal, it happened. Ryu saw her hand move beneath the table, the same motion as the first night, slow, practiced, invisible to anyone not paying the specific attention he paid to everything. Her fingers closed around a piece of rice cake, moving it toward the pocket of her sweatshirt, pale yellow now, the correct size, a small embroidered flower on the sleeve. He let her finish the motion. Then he stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a small container-fitted lid, the kind that closed securely and kept things fresh. He set it beside her bowl without comment. She looked at it. He sat back down, picked up his spoon. "Chef Cho makes too much," he said, eyes on his bowl. "Someone should take the extra. Otherwise it gets wasted. You can fill it before bed. Whatever you want. It'll be there in the morning." He didn't look at her when he said it. Kept eating like a man, commenting on the weather offhand, unimportant, requiring no response. Under the table, slowly, Nala's hand came back up empty. She placed the piece of rice cake back on her plate. And then she ate it. Right there, at the table, in the present tense. Like a child who believed, for perhaps the first time, that the present tense was a place worth eating in. He reached over and placed one more piece in her bowl. She didn't flinch. She ate that one too. That night, before she slept, she filled the container. Not because she didn't believe him, but because old fear doesn't vanish in 4 days. It just learns, slowly, that it might be wrong. The pendant landed on Ryu's desk at 7 in the morning. Nala had placed it there herself, set it down beside his coffee cup, with the deliberateness of someone who had been turning a decision over for days, then retreated to the doorway and stood watching him with her bare pressed to her chest. Thin silver chain, one link separated from the clasp. Small circular medallion, no larger than a thumbnail. On its face, a sun with 8 rays, a symbol that meant nothing to most people and everything to the right ones. The chain had snapped cleanly. She had been carrying it broken, holding the 2 pieces together in her palm while she slept. He turned it over. On the reverse, 2 initials engraved in script so small, he had to bring it close. S.K. Soo Yun Kim. He set it down, kept his face exactly where it was. "It broke," Nala said from the doorway. "Mama said not to lose it. Leave it with me." She looked at the pendant. Then, at him. "You'll give it back?" "Yes." 3 more seconds of that ancient, measuring look. Then she turned and padded back down the hallway, the bear's worn arm trailing against the wall. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a leather roll of fine tools. He had learned to work with his hands long before he learned to work with power in the early years, when there was no money for repairs. "You fixed what was broken yourself." He spread the tools on the desk, picked up the chain. The flashback didn't announce itself. 5 years ago. A different rain. An alley off Fulton Street, the smell of wet concrete and copper. He had been shot twice, once through the side, once through the arm. Not immediately fatal. The kind of wounds that become fatal when a man sits down and decides to stop. She found him against the wall. 30 years old. Slight frame. Natural hair pulled back, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too large over clothes that said she hadn't slept in 2 days. She moved to him without hesitation, without flinching, pressing both palms against his side with the focused precision of someone who had trained for this moment specifically. "How many are behind you?" 4. Maybe 5. "How far back?" 1 minute. Less. She didn't panic. She assessed the alley, the exits, the distance, the math of it with the eyes of someone who understood that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford tonight. "Who are you?" he said. She didn't answer that. She pulled him upright instead, took his weight across her shoulders, and moved. She knew every exit, every shadow, every door. She had mapped this alley before tonight, and he understood then that this was not an accident. None of it was an accident. Not her presence, not her preparation, not the specific knowledge in her hands. 3 blocks. She got him 3 blocks before the sound of footsteps changed everything. She stopped, looked at him with eyes that had already made a decision his didn't get a vote in. "Black door on the left. Knock 4 times. I'm not leaving you. You have a daughter to meet someday. Steady. Certain. You just don't know it yet." He hadn't understood that. He'd gone because she'd made it impossible to do anything else, had physically turned him toward the door with a firmness that left no room for argument. He heard the shot when he was halfway down the block. He didn't look back. She had told him not to. He had spent 5 years trying to justify that, and he had never once succeeded. The link clicked into place. He held the chain up in the morning light repaired, the clasp moving smoothly, the break invisible. He had made sure of that. He sat for a long time. Soo Yun Kim had not been a bystander. She had been inside the Baekho clan's foster system for 2 years before that night, documenting, building a case that nobody in any official capacity had been willing to receive. She had saved him because he was the only person in the city powerful enough to do what the system would not protect one specific child when the time came. She had spent 2 years preparing for a night she hadn't survived. He picked up his phone. "Find everything on Marcus Vance," he told Jinho. "Start 5 years ago. Start with the alley on Fulton." Then he walked down the hallway to where Nala sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, teaching her bear the names of things. He crouched beside her and held out his hand. She looked at the pendant hole, the chain restored, catching the morning light. Something moved through her face. Fast, private, there and gone. She took it with both hands and held it against her chest, eyes closed, exactly the way she held the bear. He stayed crouched beside her. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever met," he said quietly. "You have her eyes." Nala didn't open her eyes. But she leaned slightly, barely, just enough to be deliberate until her shoulder rested against his arm. He stayed exactly where he was. That afternoon, Jinho put a name to the man who had ordered the shooting. Marcus Vance. Foster father. Professional cleaner. The reason Soo-yeon Kim had been in that alley. The file could wait. Vance could wait. Ryu went to have lunch with his daughter. Some things were more important than revenge. For now, nobody warned Kang Jun-seo about the tea party. That was the part he would never forgive. Jinho had appeared in the doorway of the security room at 2:30, looked at Jun-seo with the expression of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis, and said, "Boss needs you in the East Wing. The child requires distraction." Jun-seo was 31 years old. He had broken 3 men's jaws in a single evening in Busan. He had once sat in a car trunk for 6 hours without making a sound because the mission required it. He had 17 tattoos, a scar through his left eyebrow from a knife fight he had won, and a reputation that made new recruits avoid direct eye contact. He looked at Jinho. "I'm in the middle of a perimeter review. The perimeter will survive." Jinho's face was immovable. "She asked for someone to play with. Everyone else volunteered you. Everyone else, unanimously." The East Wing sitting room had been transformed. Nala had been left alone for 40 minutes, with access to the decorative items on the low shelves, items that had previously included a crystal paperweight worth $11,000, a first-edition book behind glass, and 3 pieces of minimalist sculpture acquired through means Ryu preferred not to discuss. The crystal paperweight was now a centerpiece. The sculptures had become chairs for guests. 4 guests, specifically her bear at the head, 3 throw pillows arranged on either side, each one facing a small ceramic saucer that Nala had sourced from the kitchen. Each saucer held approximately 2 centimeters of barley tea, poured with evident precision. Nala herself sat cross-legged at the foot of the arrangement, holding her own saucer in both hands with the gravity of someone presiding over something important. She looked up when Jun-seo appeared. "You're late," she said. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Sit down." She pointed to the floor across from her. "That's your seat." There was no chair. There was a throw pillow with a tassel, positioned with intention on the hardwood floor, with a saucer of barley tea already waiting. Jun-seo looked at the pillow, at the saucer, at the child regarding him with absolute authority. He sat down. His knees came up almost to his shoulders. He was built like a man who had never once been designed for floors. He reached forward and picked up the saucer with 2 fingers, the delicate ceramic nearly invisible in his tattooed hand. Nala nodded with satisfaction. "You have to say hello to everyone first. That's the rule." He looked at the bear, at the pillows, a long pause. "Hello," he said, "to the bear, flatly. His name is Button. And those are Mochi, Cloud, and Sue." She pointed to each pillow. "Sue doesn't talk much. She's shy." "Right. You can tell her she looks nice. It helps." Jun-seo looked at the pillow named Sue. "You look nice," he said, with the exact tone of a man diffusing something. Nala seemed satisfied. She lifted her saucer and drank, watching him over the rim. "Do you work for the man with the dragon?" "Yes. Do you have a dragon too?" He pushed up his sleeve. The tattoo there was a tiger full-back piece wrapping around his ribs and surfacing on his forearm, the head emerging just below his elbow, mid-roar, rendered in black and gray with precision that had taken 40 hours. Nala leaned forward, studied it. "Is it angry?" "Fierce," he said. "Different thing." She considered this distinction with the seriousness it deserved. "Button is fierce too. He just doesn't look it." "Best kind," Jun-seo said. Something shifted in her expression, small, tentative, the way light moves at the very beginning of morning before it commits to being day. The corners of her mouth moved, not a full smile, the architecture of one, being tested for the first time, checking whether the structure would hold. It held. For 3 seconds, Nala smiled bright, unguarded, entirely childlike. The bruise on her cheek, doing nothing to diminish it, and somehow making it more devastating for anyone unfortunate enough to witness it. And then it folded back into her usual composure, as quickly as it had arrived. But it had happened. Ryu saw it from the hallway. He had come to check his body did this now without consulting him. He'd stopped in the doorway and found his most feared lieutenant sitting cross-legged on a throw pillow, knees at his ears, holding a saucer in 2 fingers, having a conversation with a pillow named Sue, and Nala smiling. He stood there for a moment, didn't announce himself, then he walked back to his office and looked at the city through the glass for a long time. The war, the file, the name Marcus Vance, all of it sat on his desk, exactly where he'd left it. He didn't touch any of it. Junseo never told anyone about the tea party. But 3 days later, Button appeared in the security room with a small note tucked under his arm, in uneven 6-year-old handwriting. "Thank you for coming." Junseo put the note in his jacket pocket. He kept it there for the rest of the story. It started at 2 a.m., not with a scream. With silence, the pressurized kind that fills a space where sound should be, the kind that wakes people who have trained themselves to notice the wrong type of quiet. Ryu was at his desk reviewing the Vance file when it happened. He heard it through the wall, not a scream, but the sound smaller than a scream and worse. The sound a child makes when they've learned that screaming doesn't bring anyone, so they stop screaming and make this sound instead. Low, rhythmic, barely above breathing, like a person trying to survive something entirely alone, because alone is all they've ever known. He was in the hallway before he decided to move. The guest room door was open 3 inches. He pushed it gently. Nala was in the bed tucked in as Chef Cho left her each night, but her body was rigid. Knees pulled to her chest. Eyes squeezed shut against something happening entirely inside her head. The bear was clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The food container sat on the nightstand, full. Ryu stood in the doorway. He had handled everything in his life with one of 2 tools, money or force. Every problem had yielded to one or the other. He was looking at a problem that neither could touch, and the specific helplessness of that was unlike anything he'd encountered in 20 years of being a man who was never helpless. He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, not close enough to startle her, just present a steady thing in the dark that said you are not alone in this without requiring her to respond. 30 seconds passed. 40. The sound changed pitch. Her breathing shifted, still trapped, but something had registered him. The way a drowning person registers an extended hand before they can reach it. Then, without planning it from somewhere so deep and unused he hadn't known it still existed, a song surfaced. His mother had sung it to him in a small apartment in Incheon when he was 4 years old, and the neighborhood outside was loud with a different kind of violence. A lullaby. Simple, barely 8 lines. The kind of melody that carried more in its shape than its words. He hadn't thought of it in over 20 years. It belonged to a version of himself he'd deliberately buried when he built Ryu Taeyang out of harder materials. But it was there. Every note, every word. He sang it quietly. Not well, he had no illusions about his voice. But low and steady and true in the way only things from the right place are true. Jari jari jajang jari, solal darim sode. Nala's breathing changed. The rigid line of her shoulders softened by degrees. Her knees descended from her chest. Her grip on the bear loosened, not released, but loosened, the difference between bracing and simply holding. By the second time through, her breathing had found a different rhythm, slower, deeper, the rhythm of someone descending back through layers toward actual rest. By the third, her eyes opened, not the panicked open of the nightmare. The slow, heavy-lidded open of a child surfacing from deep water, finding the room, finding him sitting at the edge of the bed in the dark, still present, not having moved or left or turned away. She looked at him for a long moment. He finished the verse, let the last note settle. Silence. Then, in a voice made small by sleep, and something that had no name yet, but was in the process of finding one, she said one word, Appa, Father. Not a question, not tentative. The way children say the words that matter most simply, directly, as a fact the world needed to be notified of. Ryu sat completely still. The word moved through him like the shot that had nearly killed him 5 years ago. Sudden, total, reorganizing everything it passed through. He had built an entire life on the principle that attachment was structural weakness. That love was a door left unlocked in a house full of enemies. He looked at this child, 6 years old, bare in her arms, eyes already closing again, satisfied. The nightmare dissolved, her body finally trusting the room enough to let go. He stayed until her breathing deepened completely. Then he reached over and adjusted the blanket carefully, without waking her, and sat in the dark for a long time afterward, not reviewing the Vance file, Not planning, not working, just sitting in a room where a child slept safely, in a silence that felt, for the first time in 20 years, like exactly enough. He never told anyone she'd said it, but Jinho noticed the next morning that the Vance file had moved from the desk to the safe. Some words, once spoken, changed the architecture of a man permanently. Appa. He carried it like the pendant close, private, worth more than anything else he owned. Marcus Vance liked to be seen. This was the first thing Jinho's surveillance report established, not a conclusion, just an observed pattern. Vance ate at visible restaurants, drove visible cars, wore the kind of suits that announced money without specifying its origin. He moved through Chicago's near north side with the ease of a man who had decided, at some point, that the best camouflage was confidence. He was 51 years old. Former Illinois Department of Children and Family Services supervisor, retired 6 years ago, under circumstances that 3 separate internal reviews had declined to examine closely. Currently licensed as an independent foster care contractor, one of 14 such contractors in Cook County, the only one who had never lost a placement to a formal abuse investigation, despite 6 complaints in 4 years. Each complaint buried. Each burial authorized from above by someone whose discretion Vance had purchased and maintained with the patience of a man who thought in decades. Jinho put the surveillance package on Ryu's desk on a Monday morning. Ryu read it across 2 hours, in between a call with the syndicate's financial counsel and a meeting about the Baekho clan's recent territory movements on the south side. He read it the way he read everything, completely, without skipping, building the picture incrementally. By the time he reached the final page, his coffee had gone cold, and the meeting had been postponed twice by people wise enough to read the room through a closed door. The final page contained 3 photographs. The first was Vance, at the restaurant Jinho had been watching for a weak corner table, bourbon, the body language of a man who had decided fear was no longer a productive operating posture. The second was Vance meeting a man identified as Lieutenant Bay of the Baekho clan in a parking garage on West Monroe. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Vance left carrying an envelope. The third photograph was Nala. A file photograph, the kind taken upon placement entry. She was wearing a gray shirt, 2 sizes too large. Her hair was uncombed. She was looking at the camera with the expression Ryu now recognized as her default setting before the penthouse. Absolute, practiced neutrality. The face of a child who had learned that expressions cost something. In the bottom corner of the photograph, handwritten in red pen, was a number, a dollar amount. Ryu looked at that number for a long time. Then he closed the folder, stood up, and stood at the window for a while doing nothing visible. When he turned back, his face was completely composed, and his eyes had the specific quality that Jinho, in 8 years of working for this man, had learned to identify as the most dangerous state he ever entered. Not rage, not cold calculation, but something beneath both of those. Something that had finished deliberating and moved into a register that had no more use for emotion, because emotion was no longer the relevant tool. He picked up his phone, put a full surveillance team on Vance, every hour. I want to know when he sleeps. He paused. And Jinho. Find Grace Ellison, the DCFS caseworker who filed the reports on Vance's placement. Find her tonight and make sure she's somewhere he can't reach. The box arrived the following Tuesday. Service entrance. 6 a.m. A courier who didn't exist. No ID, no plates, no face. The cameras managed to capture clearly. Plain box. Ordinary tape. Addressed to Ryu Tae-young by name. Vance wasn't afraid. That was the message. Before the box was even opened, Jinho brought it upstairs in gloved hands. Ryu was at breakfast with Nala rice porridge, barley tea, the food container already filled and sitting in its place on the counter because she filled it every morning now as well as every night. Jinho appeared in the doorway. Ryu read his face in under a second. Finish your rice, he told Nala. Calm, unhurried. She looked at Jinho. At Ryu. Back at her bowl. She finished her rice. The box contained a finger belonging to Grace Ellison, the caseworker who had tried to help Nala 3 times and been buried 3 times. She was alive. Jinho confirmed that within 4 minutes, Ryu had her moved to a private facility in Naperville before noon. Beneath the finger, a note card. 6 words. Give us the girl, or we burn. Ryu read it once. Set it on the desk beside the surveillance photographs, beside the dollar amount written in red pen on a file photograph of a 6-year-old in a gray shirt. He looked at all of it together. Then he picked up his phone and called Jinho. 7 o'clock. Everyone. War room. He looked at the window. At the city doing its indifferent mourning outside. And tell Chef Cho to keep Nala in the kitchen today. Something is baking. She should help. He set the phone down. Somewhere in this city, Marcus Vance was finishing his breakfast. Confident, visible, certain he had found the pressure point that would crack the Sundragon's foundation. He had found it. He had simply misunderstood what pressure points do to men who have already decided they have nothing left to lose except one thing. And that one thing was currently in the kitchen helping Chef Cho measure flour, asking questions about why bread needed to rest before it could be baked. Because it's been through something hard, Chef Cho said. It needs time before it's ready to become what it's supposed to be. Nala considered this, her small hands white with flour. Like people? Chef Cho looked at her for a moment. Exactly like people, she said. They came at midnight. Not from the front. The Baekho clan didn't come from the front that was for soldiers and statement makers, and the White Tigers were neither. They were technical, methodical. The kind of organization that treated violence the way an engineer treats a load-bearing problem. Identify the structure, find the weakness, apply precise force at the exact point that causes total collapse. They came from 3 directions simultaneously: service entrance, parking structure, roof access via the adjacent boutique hotel, whose security system had been quietly compromised 72 hours earlier by someone who understood that the best sieges begin long before anyone fires a shot. Ryu's system flagged all 3 at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes of warning. They're early, Jinho said, appearing at the war room door. No, Ryu was already moving. We were late noticing. He looked at Junseo. The vault. Now, Nala was asleep when Junseo came for her. He crossed the room in the dark and put one hand gently on her shoulder. She woke immediately, not groggy, fully present in under a second. Children who've lived in dangerous homes don't ease into waking. They arrive there all at once. She looked at his face, read it, didn't ask questions. She picked up Button, took his hand. He moved her through the penthouse quickly past the kitchen, where Chef Cho waited at the elevator with a bag over her shoulder. Her face arranged into the calm of a woman who had survived worse. Past the dining room where 2 nights ago they'd played cards on the floor. Past Ryu, who stood at the war room door in all black, phone to his ear, issuing instructions in a voice so low, and even it sounded like a man confirming a reservation. Nala stopped when she saw him. Junseo felt her hand tighten. Ryu ended the call, looked at her, crouched down. She was reading his face, looking not at the surface, but at the thing behind it, the way she always did, searching for what she needed to prepare for. He held her gaze and kept his face honest. I need you to go with Junseo. There's a safe room. You'll be inside with Chef Cho. The door is 8 inches of steel, and nothing in this building can open it except me. Where will you be? Here. Why? Because this is my house, he said, and nobody takes what's mine. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she reached out and pressed her small palm flat against his chest, directly over his heart. The way she pressed her palm against the cold window glass to feel what was on the other side. He stayed completely still. She took her hand back, tucked Button tighter. Don't get shot, she said. I'll do my best. She went with Junseo. The dragon's vault sat beneath the building's foundation, reinforced concrete, independent air supply, its own power source, stocked for 72 hours. Built 3 years ago for a contingency Ryu had hoped would never arrive. Junseo sealed the door at 11:59 p.m. Inside the vault, Nala sat cross-legged on the floor with Button in her lap. She could hear nothing through 8 inches of steel, no footsteps, no voices, no way to know what was happening in the building above her. She looked at the sealed door. Then at Junseo. He said only he can open it, she said. That's right. So we wait until he opens it. Yes, she nodded, looked back at the door. Okay, she said. And she held Button and she waited, with the particular steadiness of a child who had learned to survive uncertainty by choosing, very deliberately, what to believe. She chose to believe the door would open. She chose to believe who would be on the other side of it. At midnight, the building came alive. The Baekho clan sent 19 men. Ryu's team numbered 11, a number that looked unfavorable until you understood the geometry. Defenders always own the terrain, and Ryu had designed Obsidian's defensive architecture personally, the way a chess player designs a board they intend to play on for the rest of their life. Every corridor had a purpose. Every door had a function. Every shadow had been accounted for. The service entrance team met resistance at the second door, a reinforced barrier that bought 4 minutes, which was enough. The parking structure team met Junseo's second unit waiting in the dark, having been there for 40 minutes. 4 of the Baekho men assessed the situation correctly and decided the parking structure was no longer worth the cost of entry. The roof team was the real problem. 6 men, properly equipped, moving down from the adjacent hotel with the efficiency of people who had done this before. They breached the rooftop access at 12:04 and descended into the building's upper service corridor. The corridor was narrow, single file, designed, when Ryu built it. For exactly this contingency, a space where numbers stopped mattering and only skill remained. Ryu was at the end of it when they came through. What happened in that corridor took 4 minutes and left no ambiguity about the outcome. It was close and fast, and ugly in the way that close fighting always is. Nothing cinematic, nothing composed. The brutal arithmetic of men in a confined space where precision is the only currency that spends. Ryu Tae-young had not remained at the top of Chicago's underworld for 12 years by delegating everything. By 12:47 a.m., the building was clear. 7 Baekho men detained. Remainder fled. No casualties on their side beyond injuries that would heal. The kitchen's exterior window was gone. 2 decorative panels in Obsidian's entrance had been destroyed. Ryu stood in the main corridor and looked at the damage. Then he went to the vault. 4. Knocks the code. The locks disengaged. The door swung open. Chef Cho sat against the far wall with a cup of tea she had somehow produced from the emergency supplies, her composure entirely intact, her expression suggesting she found the whole enterprise mildly irritating. Nala was cross-legged on the floor beside her, button in her lap, food container in her hands. She had found it in the emergency bag and been holding it the entire time. She looked up when the door opened, found his face, ran her eyes over him, quickly checking, cataloging, and found what she was looking for. Standing, whole, she set the container down, stood up, crossed the vault in 6 steps, and put both arms around his waist, her face pressed against him, button crushed between them. He put one hand on the back of her head. Neither of them said anything. Outside, the Baekho clan was regrouping. Jinho was already making calls. The war was not finished. It had barely started. But in this moment, in a reinforced room beneath a damaged building, Ryu Tae-young held his daughter and understood with complete clarity what he was willing to burn the entire world down to protect. Everything else could wait. Inside the vault, before the door had opened, Nala had done one thing. She had taken the food container from the emergency bag, checked that it was full, and held it in her lap for the entire duration. Not eating from it, just holding it. The same way she held Button, the same way she held the pendant, the same way, Ryu would understand later, that she had learned to hold the things that meant she would be okay. She collected them, she held them close, and she waited for the door to open. Marcus Vance was found on a Thursday, not hiding. At a restaurant in River North, corner table, steak and bourbon, dressed in the way of men who consider themselves untouchable. No visible bodyguards, no obvious exit strategy. The confidence of a man who believed he was still the most dangerous thing in the room. He was wrong about that. Jinho had eyes on him by noon. By 2 o'clock, Ryu knew the table number, the vehicle outside, and the 3 Baekho men across the street, doing a poor job of looking like they weren't positioned across the street. At 9 p.m., Vance arrived at the warehouse in Pilsen. He was unhurt. Ryu had been specific about that he needed Vance functional, which required Vance intact. When the hood came off, Vance blinked against the single overhead light and took inventory with professional eyes. Exits, number of men, distance to Ryu, who sat across from him at a plain metal table. Between them, open, the surveillance briefcase, photographs, documents. The operational infrastructure of the Baekho clan's foster system pipeline children moved like inventory, each placement a transaction. 7 years of it running beneath a city that preferred not to look too closely at what happened to children. Nobody was loudly looking for. Vance looked at the documents. "You went through my property," he said. "I did. That's not admissible. I'm not a court. I'm something considerably less patient." Vance recalibrated. The mental movement of a man understanding that the conversation he prepared for is not the conversation he's in. "What do you want?" Ryu reached into the briefcase and produced a document that had not come from Vance's files. Clean pages, legal formatting, 2 bookmarked signature lines. He placed it on the table and turned it to face Vance. An adoption agreement. Formal, complete, prepared by a family law attorney whose discretion had been confirmed before engagement. Every field filled, every legal requirement satisfied. Nala Soo-yeon Kim on the first line, Ryu Tae-young on the second. "You're serious," Vance said. "I've never been anything else. I signed this, the Baekho clan." "The Baekho clan," Ryu said quietly, "is no longer a variable in your calculations. Their pipeline documentation is currently being reviewed by 3 federal contacts who find child trafficking considerably more interesting than whatever the Baekho clan has been paying them to overlook. By the time you leave this room, their operation in this city is finished." He let that settle. "You called her merchandise," he said. Still low, still even. The voice of a man conducting a meeting, which was somehow worse than any other register he could have used. "You assigned her a value. You moved her through a system designed to consume children the city had decided not to protect. And when she ended up somewhere you couldn't reach her, you sent body parts to my building as a negotiating position. He picked up the pen, set it beside the document. I call her daughter. I have called her that since the night she stood barefoot in the rain and asked a stranger if anyone wanted her. Only one of us leaves this room having given her something real. Vance looked at the pen, at the document, at Ryu. The overhead light hummed. Outside, a train moved through Pilsen on elevated tracks, the sound arriving and departing like punctuation. Vance picked up the pen. He signed. Ryu collected the document, examined the signature. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at Vance one final time. She checks under her bed every night, he said. Both sides, twice. That's what you left in her. I'll spend the rest of my life replacing it. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Be grateful I needed your signature. Then he left. The drive back took 20 minutes. Ryu held the adoption document the entire way. Not reviewing it. Not thinking about next steps. Just holding it. A piece of paper that said, in the formal language of the law, what had been true in every way that mattered, since a 6-year-old put her frozen fingers into his hand outside a golden door. She was his. She had always been going to be his. Soo-yeon Kim had known that before either of them did. 3 months later, Ryu Tae-yang wore a yellow shirt to the park. Not by choice, or rather, not by his choice. Nala had found it in the back of his closet 3 weeks ago, still in its packaging, held it up with both hands, examined it with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions, and looked at him. This one. I don't wear yellow. You should. She tilted her head. It looks like the sun. You're the sun dragon. It makes sense. He had worn black the next day, and the day after. But this morning, without discussion, he'd opened the packaging. Lincoln Park was loud, with March not warm, but relenting. The particular grudging quality of a city that had been winter for 5 months and was finally, irritably, agreeing to reconsider. The sky was pale bright blue. Children moved across the grass in the chaotic way of small people who have been kept inside too long. Nala walked beside him with button under her arm and new white shoes on her feet, a small embroidered sun on each toe. Chef Cho's selection, presented with the gravity of a jeweler offering something important. She looked at them periodically as she walked, the way people look at things they're still getting used to owning. They found a bench near the lake. Ryu sat. Nala climbed up beside him, settled button on her other side, and looked out at the water. It's big, she said. Yes. Bigger than the river? Much bigger. She considered this. Can you own a lake? No. Good, she said, with a satisfaction suggesting she'd already decided lakes should belong to everyone or no one, and was pleased the world agreed. He looked at her. 3 months. 94 days since the rain and the pendant and the coat dragging on the floor. In that time she had learned that food was permanent, that doors didn't mean danger, that a room could be entered and exited freely without calculating the cost. She still checked under the bed both sides, twice. She still filled the container before she slept, and now before she left the penthouse too, and sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, for no specific reason except that having it full made the hours feel more navigable. But she also hummed now. Openly, without stopping when footsteps passed. She had taught Junseo 2 card games. She asked questions constantly about the lake, about Korea, about whether buildings felt lonely when they were empty, about whether Button experienced things when she wasn't holding him. She was, in the language of people who study such things, beginning to attach. In the language of everyone else, she was becoming herself. Appa. He looked down. She was still watching the lake, her legs dangling off the bench. What happened to my mama? The question arrived the way the important ones always do without warning, in the middle of something ordinary, at the precise moment when a person has finally accumulated enough safety to ask it. He had prepared for this, had turned the answer over for weeks, finding the version that was true and scaled for a child without being scaled down to dishonesty. Nala had been lied to by enough people who thought they were protecting her. She was very brave, he said. She worked to protect children who needed protecting, and she got hurt doing that work. Did it hurt her? At the end? I don't think it did. Not for long. Were you with her? I was close. Not close enough. A pause. That's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Nala absorbed this with the stillness that meant she was filing it carefully, finding the right place for it in the architecture of what she understood. She knew you'd find me, she said. Not a question. Yes. She made sure of it. She was smart. The smartest person I ever met, he said. You have her eyes. Something moved through Nala's face, private, deep. the movement of a thing being placed somewhere permanent and precious. She leaned sideways until her head rested against his arm, her legs still swinging, Button held loosely now instead of tightly. He stayed completely still, let her weight settle against him. Around them, the park continued, children running, the lake doing its indifferent gray-green thing at the edge of everything. Chicago moving through its morning with complete indifference to the fact that something important was happening on a bench near the water. After a while, Nala sat up and reached into the bag for the food container, opened it, took out a piece of rice cake and ate it right there, in the present tense, looking at the lake. Then she held the container out to him. He took a piece. They sat like that, a man in a yellow shirt, and a girl with a worn bear and a container of food between them, while the city moved and the lake held its opinion, and the pale March sun did its best with what it had. It was enough. It was, by every measurement, that actually mattered. Everything. The adoption was finalized on a Friday. Nala Su-yeon Ryu. She had chosen to keep both names, her mother's and his, and nobody who understood either name had anything to say about that except yes. That evening, Chef Cho made a feast nobody had asked for and everyone needed. Junseo came with a gift, a new bear, identical to Button, still tagged. Nala thanked him gravely, placed it beside Button on her pillow, and informed him its name was Sue. After the shy pillow, Junseo put his hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he sat down and had dinner with his family.